I'm back! None withholding the video I just dropped, it's been a while. And that's for the obvious reasons. It's just kinda hard to keep up a coherent release schedule when you're doing a full-time job. To add insult to injury, I bogged myself down with this massive 3+ hour project that ate the whole fall, and it's still unfinished. Anyways, I'll try to release more often in the coming months. Not because of algorithm-based reasons, but because I have too many ideas, and if I constantly dive headfirst into these monster projects, I will never be able to express all of them, and that's just kind of frustrating. So why a best of the year video then? Well, for 3 reasons. 1. It allows me to talk about movies I found hard to fit into essays. 2. It gives you a better understanding of my taste. Having it be mediated through the essays I want to make might give a wrong impression, and I think taste is an essential part of understanding any video essay's point of view. And 3. To recommend some movies in a more concise manner and not to spoil them for you before you've even heard of them. So here's the deal. This isn't the typical year-end list. I won't be talking about the movies that came out in 2022. I just didn't see a lot of them, so it would be kind of unfair for me. Instead, I'm talking about my movie watching highlights of the year. There are some real deep cuts, some movies I needed to watch for educational purposes, and a lot of gonzo stuff that needs more eyes on them. But before we get to the actual list, I want to do a couple of honorable mentions. For movies that are interesting and worth your time, but maybe not like masterpieces. All clear? Okay, let's go.
Vesper.
I saw this movie at Love and Anarchy, the Helsinki International Film Festival, and it's a bit of a hidden gem. I really love how this movie looks, from the interesting sci-fi designs, to the intricate details on the biomes, and even kinda down to the clothing. Take this shot for example. You can immediately tell who's upper class and who's lower class just by a glance. That's a neat bit of storytelling in my opinion. Vesper to me is kinda reminiscent of a children's movie, and now that I think about it, I think the closest reference to Vesper might be the original Dark Crystal movie. I think my feelings stem from the use of practical effects, which are just the tiniest bit jank, but are so tangible and so present in this way that CGI just couldn't be. I don't know, it's a pretty good movie, and as my partner pointed out, the most interesting part about Vesper is its disability representation. Like, it's not every day you see a quadriplegic main character in a sci-fi movie, or in movies in general for that matter. It's kind of a shame though that the story itself isn't that interesting, it's very basic. But if that's not like a deal breaker for you, I would highly recommend Vesper.
Matador.
Pedro Almodovar is one of my partner's favorite directors, and he's slowly turning out to be one of my favorites too. I don't want to talk too much about him in this section because he will return later on. Matador is one of his earlier movies and stars young Antonio Banderas in the main role as a fake serial killer who's studying to be a matador. After a police investigation is launched, we find out that the 2 actual killers have locked into each other's orbit in a complicated game of seduction. From that premise alone, you can probably tell it's a wild ride. And it delivers on that promise. It's much in the typical style of Almodovar, which is to say, it's stellar across the board, but it got excluded because there's another one of his movies on the list. 1 movie per director and all that, you know?
Kälin.
This might be the most obscure and inaccessible film on this list. Kälin, or Kilin, is a movie about an arranged marriage made in Kazakhstan in 2009. It's set somewhere in between 2nd and 4th century. It's technically a silent movie. Its story is deeply steeped in rural Kazakh rituals of the time, and it's probably the most bonkers psychosexual drama I've seen all year. And considering there are 2 Almodovar movies on this list, that's saying something. I kinda don't want to spoil it because it doesn't seem like anyone else has seen it, but I think it would be helpful to set the correct expectation towards it by mentioning that most of the movie is about sex and its consequences. And it really goes to places. Would I recommend it? Well, hell yeah, it's a one-of-a-kind experience. And trying to find it will help you acquire a useful set of skills.
Taste.
Oh man. I don't think concrete has ever looked this gorgeous.
Black Magic M66.
The upcoming 3 entries are very much related. In the last couple of years, I've built a habit of watching OVAs, original video animations, in a frenzy for 1 month of the spring. I usually go in looking for cool monsters, previously unimaginable scenes, and general weirdness over thematic depth or even compelling storylines. May of 2022 was the best OVA month so far. I saw so many of these forgotten relics and found some real gems. What's fun about these is that they're crazy available, because pretty often they're just straight up on YouTube. And that's how you get to gems like Black Magic M66. It was made by the director of Golden Boy, so you know it's gonna be great. Well, at least if you know, you know. Watch Golden Boy.
So, how do you like my swimming?
Anyways, Black Magic M66 is a fun Terminator ripoff that dares to ask the question, what if the thing coming after you wasn't a mountain range of a man, but a machine elf instead?
Elf, intelligent, self-transforming machine elf. It's not clear they are masters. They are made of light.
No. Not the psychedelic kind, but like this. It's just great, right? If you haven't taken the plunge into OVAs yet because of the, honestly justifiable, reputation of edgy ultraviolence, I think Black Magic M66 is a great place to start. Its violence never gets to a point where it wouldn't be approved in an 80s action movie, and the final third of the movie is such an high-octane action treat, it's worth the price of admission alone.
Ogre Slayer.
Ogre Slayer, on the other hand, is not that. It's totally underrated, underseen, gory glory. It has an ogre coming out of a vagina in the first episode, so you know what you're going in for.
Vampire Wars.
I don't know why this movie gets such a bad rap. I do have a theory, but I think people go into this expecting like a quote-unquote actual vampire movie. This is just like super dumb fun, like an 80s Schwarzenegger action movie with like horror vibes in it. And when watched like that, it's a pretty stellar piece of genre storytelling. If you need proof of that, you don't need to look much further than our main character.
Meraki and I went back a long way. He'd worked with me on the Communist Direct Action Group in Japan. We'd hatched a plot to blow up Tokyo's financial district by dropping a remote-controlled airliner packed with high explosives into it. It flattened it like a dog turd under a steamroller. The Nikkei sure crashed that day. What Meraki was doing in Paris, I didn't know. And I didn't ask.
Like, how many other action movies have a main character with an actual political agenda? And I'm not talking about the sort of incidental, between-the-lines American patriotism that haunts the classics. I'm talking about having a character with some spine and a good heart. And that's not all. Peep this. The story is about a girl with a mysterious blood disease that's being hunted down by a clique of immortal vampires that are in actuality psychic aliens that have their designs referencing the Nordic alien. You can't get much better than this. It had me doing the Sickos meme in my head the whole way through. If you want a dumb, fun action OVA you can watch with the bros on a Friday, cracking open a cold one with one hand and smoking a blunt on the other, may I humbly suggest Vampire Wars.
Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
And as for the last honorable mention in our list, I think this is the movie people are expecting. Everything Everywhere All at Once is a good movie, a great movie even, but it didn't really hit perfectly with me. Hear me out. I think it's one of those movies that will be remembered, and I think its greatest value is that it's going to inspire so many new filmmakers. That all being said, I do wish it was a little bit more independent from its influences. I've grown so wary of this wink and nudge referencing, and Everything Everywhere All at Once has so many of them that it just kind of detracted from the experience for me. Still, good movie, highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. You probably have though. And now, with that done, it's time to get into the top 25. This list is organized in the order I saw them. There will be a date I saw it on in the title card, so you can keep up on the timeline. Okay, let's dig in.
Crestone.
I really started the year off right. On January 1st, I saw Crestone, a documentary about a commune of SoundCloud rappers living in the desert. Their days are filled with growing weed, making music, and ransacking the buildings nearby. These boys are essentially trying to create a utopia, but they lack any ideological basis it could be built upon. The movie really opens up when you think about it from the perspective of a revolution. Crestone is visually littered with signifiers of current capitalist mode. You have drones, VR, smartphones out the wazoo, and none of them are used in any subversive ways. This in and of itself isn't bad. I think the leftist project in general should strive to give people a good life, demanding to cash in on the empty promises of capital, but for any of that to work, we need solidarity. Pure hedonism can't do. We need to work together for common goals and find ways to do that efficiently so we can all get to the Crestone state of mind as soon as possible, but these boys don't have any of that.
You don't realize how much you use water for until you don't have it. Brushing your teeth, all this stuff, it all requires water. Then we gotta argue over the shit, like who's used more water than who, and no one remembers. Everyone lies, even if they don't mean to. It's human nature to look out for yourself. There's only a little bit of water. We should just give each person one jug, and that's their jug, and if they use it, don't fucking touch my jug, you know?
As the world around them starts to seep into their bubble, total collapse is always mere minutes away. At the end of the movie, there are these notes of quiet apocalypticism. As the commune gets deeper and deeper into petty interpersonal schisms, resources dwindle, and a fire far away starts to darken the sky, I knew I was primed to love this movie. It works on a similar frequency to Don DeLillo's novel Point Omega, which is my favorite book of all time. Crestone is a fascinating peer into a failed project, even if it's not billed as such. Really stellar stuff. Actually, before we leave Crestone, if you want to know what's coming up on my top watches of 2023, you should check out Unien Savonlinna. It does a similar thing, but with the Finnish art commune / experimental folk band / esoteric religious group Paavoharju and its related projects. It's on YouTube with English subtitles, so do the right thing and go watch it after watching this video.
Clear cut.
This should be an honest-to-God in every book about cinema type classic. Clear Cut is a story about a lawyer fighting for the right of the native peoples to their land while a logging company is trying to steal it from them. When he ultimately fails in the court, things take a turn towards the unlawful, but also towards true justice.
Crazy can escape. They always do escape, wake up gone from what they do. The bad ones, the terrible ones with their chainsaws and their log skidders, they always wake up gone from what they do.
It's a really compelling moral story about direct versus systematic violence, and it's driven by its most controversial character. Graham Greene's Arthur is one of the best antagonists I've ever seen, not only because of his menacing presence on screen, but also for his unending charisma.
Don't do this.
Well, don't you hate him? I thought you did.
I do, but this
No, I thought you really hated him.
I'm going to appeal. I am. I can beat him in court.
Here he comes.
Violence will accomplish nothing. Nothing, you understand?
Now, just who are you lying to?
While his actions might be horrifying, the reason they are done is so compellingly righteous, it's hard not to come around to seeing him as the protagonist of the movie. Again, it's the distinction between systematic violence, which affects a lot of people but isn't recognized as violence, versus direct, interpersonal violence between victims of said systematic violence and its perpetrators. Clear Cut is one of the most prescient horror movies of our times, and it would be such a shame if you were to miss it.
We're all going to the World's Fair.
I think I had the biggest journey of the year with this one. I went in with the wrong expectation. I was kinda looking for jank SCP vibes or like a surreal horror story or whatever, but I walked out kinda disappointed. But the more I thought about it, it just rang so true. There's something so inexpressible in it. It feels so personal, it feels so intimate and earnest, and just it manages to communicate this very difficult discussion about what it's like to be on the internet as a minor, as a child, with people who are maybe preying on you, maybe people who are trying their best but unable to help you either ways. It just hit home so hard. And I feel it's one of those movies that should be in the history books on the early 2020s. Fantastic piece of work.
The Eagle.
I find this one a little hard to talk about. By most metrics, it's a pretty average mid-budget Hollywood action movie taking place in a historical setting, but I just found it immensely enjoyable to watch. It stars Channing Tatum and Jamie Bell on the lead roles, playing a Roman general and a prisoner on a quest to retrieve a lost Aquila during the British occupation. The action is good, the landscapes look beautiful, and the pacing is on point. It's one of my partner's all-time favorite movies, and it's gay as hell. Sometimes, that's all you really need to have a great time.
The Wolf House and The House.
As I mentioned in the beginning of my video, to become an office scripted, a study of the odd mundane, I've been writing a long essay on horror animation for like a year and a half now. It's still in pre-production because the subject is just so huge. The Wolf House and The House slotted so nicely into that discussion, so while doing the most intense research binge, I watched them basically back to back because the names were similar, and that's kind of funny. I wanted to write about the ways they're in conversation with each other, but the more I reflected on it, the more I noticed that they work better as contrasting pieces. But before we get there, let's get a little synopsis on both of them. The Wolf House is a Chilean stop-motion horror animation directed by Cristobal Leon and Joaquin Conchina. I hope those names are correct. I'm so sorry if they're not. It tells the story of Maria, a young girl who escapes a compound based on Colonia Dignidad, an actual camp run by the Nazis who escaped to South America in the latter parts of World War II. As you might expect from fascists, Colonia Dignidad has a horrible history of violence, torture, and murder both towards their own members and in collusion with the Pinochet government of the 70s. With such a heavy backdrop, The Wolf House tells a harrowing story that's presented as a diegetic piece of propaganda for the colony. That's why it's such an overwhelming nightmare, right? It's trying to show how a fascist cult would reframe the rest of the world as a deeply hostile place, and to do that, it reappropriates the imagery of Three Little Pigs, but reverses one of the most recognizable parts of it. The wolf in the original children's tale is replaced by the image of a sheepdog trying to herd the missing soul back to the flock before the independence away from the cult gets the better of her. This metaphor is the key to understanding the Wolf House. We're invited to see through the reframing by reaffirming our knowledge of the original story. We know what the wolf is, and thus, we can guess what the Wolf House is, because this house is not it. It's something much worse, and by seeing that, we can break the seduction. But can Maria? The House, on the other hand, is an anthology movie comprised of 3 stop-motion animated tales that are all connected via the house that they take place in. The house works more as a creative prompt than a basis for chronology, so don't get it twisted. The shorts are directed by Paloma Baeza, Nikki Lindroth Wambar, and the directing duo Emma Desvaerf and Mark James Rolls. I think the marketing focused pretty heavily on the horror aspects of the anthology, but in reality, one of the stories is a somber drama about climate change, one of them is a Yorgos Lanthimos-esque dark satire, and only one of them is a proper horror movie. It's still a great collection, and their sequencing makes them work wonderfully. The highlight for most people is the first one, titled A Herd Within, A Lie Is Spun. A deliciously delirious story about a family that's propositioned to move into a big house that keeps changing under their feet. I tend to agree with most people, it's pretty amazing. The other two are pretty great too, but when compared, oh boy. Swarf and Rose knocked it out of the park before anyone else had the chance to bat. So why did I pair these two together? Well, I think they provide a super interesting pipeline into each other. The Wolf House is an experimental masterpiece, laying out an exciting future for stop-motion animation with the new techniques it's pushing forward, while the house uses already established techniques to burrow deep into the stories it's trying to tell. In my mind, they form a loop where watching one informs the other, showing how the medium of animation, especially stop-motion, still has so many avenues to explore and so many stories to tell. That sort of stuff is super exciting. I hope the attention the house got paves the way for more exciting stuff like this, and considering Wendell and Wild, it seems that Netflix is at least trying it on for size, until they eventually got to have that hit of the cancellation kush. But yeah, seek these two out. They're well worth your time and attention if the medium of animation is something you're passionate about.
Belle.
Me and my partner went to see this as a Valentine's date last year, and I gotta say, I cried my eyes out while watching this movie. For as long as I can remember, I've been a Mamoru Hosoda fan. One of my earliest memories is about watching the Digimon movie at my friend's 7th birthday party, and being so immersed in it that I didn't even notice that the other kids left the room like halfway through to do party stuff. I've always been like this. Anyways, I can't really fault my younger self too much. After growing up with Disney movies, Pokemon, and late 90s Saturday cartoons, the style Hosoda brought to Digimon was rapturous. I always preferred Digimon over Pokemon, and watching this alongside the first two Pokemon movies only strengthened that bond. And while I haven't kept up with Digimon as much as I've wanted to, it still holds a special place in my heart. Digimon forever. Another memory I hold dear is about seeing Summer Wars in the summer I was doing my non-military service. It was a beautiful day. I had a window open so that the noises of the neighborhood would just flood in, and I was trying my hardest to get the scratched up library DVD to work on my PS2. I remember crying a lot that day, even though I immediately noticed that Summer Wars was just the Digimon movie again, with the serial numbers filed off. Belle is the third part of this loose trilogy about the internet Hosoda has been making for the past 20 odd years. It's hard to weigh against something like the Digimon movie, which is woven into my soul on a molecular level, but if I try my hardest to step outside of myself, it might be the best one of the trilogy. Living in the age of social media, it's sometimes hard to see the value in it. Even if you're not actively seeking it out, it's hard not to come across some heinous shit on the daily, and it can just be a lot to take in. Belle is very much concerned with this world, taking in the strangeness that comes with success in the internet age, but instead of being callous and alarmist, it opens its heart wide open. It comes in and gives you so much to love, from the adorable romance between the two side characters to the unconditional solidarity to people in need that crescendos in a genuinely breathtaking musical number. I don't even like pop music that much, and yet I just can't stop crying when I'm editing this footage. I feel that if we're trying to keep up this project of humanity interconnecting through these horrible systems and terrible algorithms, we need these sorts of humanitarian reminders on why they matter in the first place. And because of that, I treasure this movie with my very being.
Extra.
I'm here to correct the record. Extra is not a trash movie. And look, I get it, it's got all the hallmarks of a movie you'd put on to rip with your buddies. The plot is hard to follow, the most immediately hard-hitting stuff is the special effects, and generally the movie doesn't seem to understand that we're here to see the monster and gore, not some family drama. We've all seen those movies, right? The ones that are so up their ass and so low budget that they just have to riff on something completely irrelevant. But like, these are the complaints people have about the original Godzilla too, right? And I would personally place Extro closer to that edge of the genre cinema scale than say Troll 2. Yes, I am actually saying that Extro is deep. Let me lay out the thought process here. If we trace the outline of the movie without the sci-fi elements, it's a story about a father who disappears without a trace for 3 years, traumatizing his son and leaving the family in shambles. Then all of a sudden, he returns out of nowhere and has to face the effects of his absence. It's a movie concerned with the breakdown of the family unit, which was a theme that was very relevant in the time it was created. Extro was released in 1982, 3 years into Thatcher's ruinous regime. One of the many side effects of her austerity policies was that divorce shot up 11% over her reign, devastating the British family unit. It's not surprising then that a movie like Extro would take all of that and transform it into an achingly disturbing piece of genre cinema.
Next of kin.
Next of Kin is quintessential Australian neo-gothic horror. It's the story of Linda, who after losing her mother returns to a house she inherited from her, only to find out it has been turned into an old people's home. After she settles in, a string of eerie happenings start to permeate throughout the house, from losses of life to seemingly supernatural hauntings, and through all of this, she has to come to terms with the fact that things are not, nor have they ever been, what they seem. Next of Kin is a patient slow burn with some striking neo-gothic imagery and an explosive climax.
Linda.
I've read some reviews where people say that they find it hard to stay on board because of the languid pace of the beginning, but I assure you, if you stick with it, it will reward you. I legitimately stood up in awe when things started to pick up pace. It's the perfect horror movie to just cozy up on a rainy day with a blanket and a hot drink and just let it work its magic. Such a vibe. Also, while I'm here, I would be remiss not to mention that Australia is a great country when it comes to horror movies, with stuff like Lake Mungo, The Dreaming, and Natalie Erica James' short movies Creswick and Drumwave. They have a canon they can really be proud of.
Night Moves.
Jesus Christ, this movie. Full on, stomach-churning suspense from beginning to end. My god. It's a story about 3 eco-terrorists blowing up a dam and having to live with the consequences. It's fucking phenomenal. Shit. The core trio of Jesse Eisenberg, Dakota Fanning, and Peter Sarsgaard share this pitch-perfect paranoid chemistry about them that's really compelling and drives the movie. It's also shot in this beautiful naturalistic way that really heightens the atmosphere of the movie. Especially the scenes surrounding the dam were so intense I was gripping my sofa so hard, like I actually thought I was gonna break it. Kelly Reichardt is one of those modern directors that's poised to be like an auteur of our times, and if her other movies are this good, man, I can see it. I'm so excited for showing up whenever that releases here.
Mermaid Forest.
人魚の伝説は本当だったのね。
If you know Rumiko Takahashi, it doesn't come as a surprise that this goes hard as fuck. And for those who don't know her, she's a famous mangaka known for her series like Ranma 1/2, Inuyasha, and Urusei Yatsura. For my generation of Finnish weebs, she was a near unmatched hero when it came to weekly manga paperbacks. Mermaid Forest is an anime adaptation of one of her lesser-known mangas, The Mermaid Saga. It's only part 1 of a 2-part series, but for whatever reason I didn't get to watching the second part, Mermaid Scar, in 2022. maybe I'll watch it this year, who's to say. It's a horror anime telling a version of a classic Japanese folktale called Yoi Bikuni, the story of a young girl who was fed mermaid flesh and achieved immortality because of it. If you're a gamer, you might already be familiar with it. It is the same story Sekiro built its central conceit around as well. If you only have a passing knowledge of Takahashi's works, this whole thing might seem a little off. Her claim to fame is mostly based on stories that broadly fall under the YA umbrella, stories about young people going on adventures with their friends, but Inuyasha already had some horror elements in it, and it's surprisingly dark at times. Tonally, Mermaid Forest is pretty similar, but it tones down the adventure and teenage drama elements in service of its horror. Even though there's still plenty of blood, mostly courtesy to the main trio's immortality, it's not hardcore or anything. Honestly, none of her horror-oriented works are, but if you're looking for something more horror-y, I would recommend Laughing Target over Mermaid Forest. If I were to describe the atmosphere of Mermaid Forest, I would say it's somber rather than terrifying. Like Next of Kin, it's a real blankets and hot drinks sort of watch for me. If that sounds like your thing, I highly recommend it.
Galerian's Ryan.
Okay. You might be watching this and think I've finally completely lost my marbles, but nope, this movie fucking rocks. I wanted to write an essay about quote-unquote lo-fi CGI, the early 2000s thing, before things got all photorealistic and boring, mostly because I love this old forgotten obscure horror movie called Malice at the Doll so much, and this seemed like a good companion piece for it. After watching it, I can confirm, it really was. Galerian's Ryan is filled with mall goth edginess and this post Final Fantasy VII angst, which was big in DeviantArt when I used to use it, and it's having this mosh pit in an anime convention thing with the 15-year-old me that still lives in my soul. And fuck, the music is so good. Actually, hey, let's take a listen.
みんな死んだのね。いくら呼びかけても答えてくれなかったもの。パスカーレ博士は私を逃がした後、リリア。
I just love it. I love it. Sadly, the essay wasn't meant to be because, while I did find these modern vaporwavy lo-fi CGI videos, they all seem to use the jack of their style more as a crutch than as a way of showing something cool. And that's the thing that really matters to me. Movies like Galerian's Ryan, Malice at Doll, and I don't know, the first Final Fantasy movie had this sincere want to show you an artistic vision, but were made with tech that was outdated the second they came out. I don't know. As we roll back through history on our never-ending quest for nostalgia, I personally think it would be much more constructive to adopt a lens to look for the inherent artistry in styles we've abandoned. Isn't that why the PS1 graphics indie gaming scene is so cool? They're constructing something that wasn't fully explored and has a distinct feeling that can't be expressed with realism and high fidelity. And if that works with games, why shouldn't it work with movies too? Galerian's Ryan is on YouTube right now in upscaled 4K if you wanna soften the landing, and I think watching it is worth your time, if only to reflect back on this. And for the tunes, of course.
Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma.
This was the shiniest gem of this year's OVA month. Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma is a supernatural ninja story about the strict roles society enforces upon us. We follow Hikage, who's in pursuit of his best friend Maro, who has seemingly gone rogue after a campaign of blood sacrifices they have embarked upon on behest of their feudal overlord. There's this moment right there in the opening where the narrator describes how the blood of the innocent peasants soaks into the earth while the screen is sullied with these extraordinarily ugly brownish reds. It really drives home how horrible this whole pursuit is and makes a great case for Maro's heel turn. I'm trying my hardest to keep these short because a good amount of them will be discussed in later videos, but I do want to add that the story is very deeply queer in a way I find extremely compelling, although the tropes it uses might be considered a little problematic. But that's a discussion for another time and another video. Visually speaking, it's a lush affair, building a true sense of magic by contrasting the muted naturalism of the conversational scenes with the deep unnatural hues when the action kicks off. It looks exactly how you'd wish an 80s horror OVA would look like, which is to say, perfect.
Personal Shopper.
Personal Shopper by Oliver Assayas is one of those movies that states a very obvious thing, but in a way that reveals a lot of the complexity underlying stories that we're familiar with. It's the story of Maureen, who works as, well, the personal shopper for a supermodel called Kira Gelman. These works put her near fabulous wealth and opulence, but she's unable to experience it directly, always having to channel it for her wealthy customer. Outside of work, she does research as a medium, trying to establish a connection to her brother who has recently passed. In life, they shared a connection through the occult, and together they made a promise that if one were to die before the other, they would try to contact them from the other side. This has left Maureen to frequent his house in hopes of establishing this connection, only to be left unsure time after time. On top of all of this, after around the first third of the movie, a mysterious person starts to stalk her and encourages her to do stuff that puts her work at risk. I told the story in this order because professional life sort of works as this hub area for the other elements of the movie. A lot of people seem to be hung up on the ghost story, which, to be clear, is essential, but if you go into it expecting it to be a ghost story with all the trappings, you might leave confused. Personal Shopper is a ghost story happening in real life, as in, if you were to be in Maureen's shoes, things would play out much in the same way. Ghosts, whether real or not, might take up a lot of mental space, but excluding extraordinary circumstances, they always have to remain in the background radiation of your life. Most ghost stories don't really want to deal with this reality, for understandable reasons. Would The Conjuring... No, that's too mainstream. Would Terrified be a better movie if the ghosts weren't the main focal point of the movie? I doubt it. In these movies, the haunting is everything. It's a totalizing force, but in reality, you can't dedicate your life to something like that. Personal Shopper understands this and ties everything in its story through the many entities haunting our everyday life.
Mimic 2.
I really didn't expect this to happen. The first Mimic is okay. It's a fun little creature feature from Your Friend and Mine, Guillermo del Toro, but it's nothing remarkable. It has an interesting premise, some cool designs, a couple of good set pieces, and very subtle themes towards Christianity.
We call it the Judas breed.
They have Jesus on the cross, but that is not holy cross.
But Mimic 2, on the other hand, is a whole different infestation. Compared to the first one, it has it all. It's grimier, it's more intense, it has like slight giallo vibes, and that ending scene? That motherfucking ending scene? Absolutely stellar stuff. Also, the main character is like, just check this out.
Your common household cockroach takes it a step further. Not only does he use food to attract the female, but he mounts her as soon as she dips down to eat it. Of course, more often than not, he can't find her external genitalia through all that body armor, so dinner ends up being kind of a bust from a biological perspective. Now, your common female bedbug needs no external genitalia whatsoever. The male simply impales her wherever he wants, and if she's lucky enough to survive the experience, she may actually reproduce. You can always tell the number of times she's mated by counting the scars.
I used to be her! Like way back in film school. This was my icebreaker as well. And I did have friends, weird enough. But yeah, Mimic 2. Probably one of the best horror sequels ever made? Question mark? And if you end up agreeing with me, may I suggest some further reading? Maybe something like more Hayden Benson's 2014 movie Spring, or the 1986 OVA Call Me Tonight? Wink.
Crimes of the Future.
Also another big one, Crimes of the Future. Also saw this in Love and Anarchy. It's David Cronenberg's newest movie, and I think it's his take on microplastics discourse, but it also could just be about body modification, maybe? A very interesting movie, and it has been talked to death, and I don't feel like I have that much more to add to it, except to maybe say it's the funniest Cronenberg so far. It got a couple of good laughs from the audience when I was seeing it, for a good reason. Also, once again, Kristen Stewart is killing it in this movie.
Surgery is sex, isn't it?
Is it?
You know it is. Surgery is the new sex.
Does it have to be new sex?
Yes. Yes, it's time.
If you haven't already seen it, go the first possible moment you got. It is fantastic.
Spring and Chaos, and Night on the Galactic Railroad.
These two were research watches for a video about furry art, but as I started to look into them, I fell into a rabbit hole that deserves its own video, which is coming eventually. Night on the Galactic Railroad is a cult classic, which I hadn't seen for whatever reason up until this point. I know, my bad, but that has been mended now. Its fame precedes it. It's exactly as eerie, glorious, and spiritual as people say. And, for those not in the know, it's the story of two cat boys who take a magical journey on a train that's not at all subtly a metaphor for the afterlife. It's essential watching, but again, I will be discussing it in its own video later down the line. Spring and Chaos, on the other hand...
Quiet! It's study time when our teacher's not here. Shut up, you geek!
What? Hell yeah! What?
It is the biography of Kenji Miyazawa, the original author behind Night on the Galactic Railroad. And it's kinda the best biography ever. I've been really thinking about this, what is the point of a biopic? There's this inherent conflict and tension in every biopic, because life cannot be fit into a 3-act structure, and whenever we do it, we are simplifying a person's life up to a point of absurdity. And when we expand that sort of simplification to a whole genre, we get to a point where it becomes incentivized to create these simplified stories which smooth over the most important parts of people's lives, the parts that made them human instead of these entertainment machines. There's a video made by Patrick H. Willems on the subject, which breaks down the musical biopic in terms of repetition and genre tropes that I would highly recommend on this subject, but I think the issue goes deeper than just genre stagnation. People reflect on their lives through the art they consume, and having this formula repeat again and again with stories that purport to be recollections of real people's life is kind of iffy to me. I'm not saying there's a massive cultural shifting problem here, but I could easily see it feeding back to alienation, that is with thoughts like, my life isn't going the way it's supposed to, I feel lost, what am I even doing with my life? Or it could be feeding back to the great man theory of history, saying that there's this formula people have chosen to take part in that makes them great. Both of these are already established as deeply held cultural narratives, and they both need constant critical focus to dismantle. Spring and Chaos circumvents this issue by eschewing the normal dramatic form completely. It's more like a tapestry, comprising of these small intimate moments from different points in his life and these immense expressions of his inner life, which are so specific to Kenji that they can't be generalized the same way that like a rock band story can be. But I don't have a fully coherent thought yet, you'll just have to wait for the video for that. Before I leave, I want to recommend one thing. Watch Spring and Chaos with the English dub. I know this is sort of the cardinal sin in the anime community, but I think it really captures the sort of goofy yet profound whimsy of the main character, way better than the Japanese one.
Copernicus of the New Age, take this unbearable weight of gravity and liberate this galaxy!
Mirrored Mind.
When I saw users on Letterboxd describe this movie with sentences like Vaporwave ASMR version of Inland Empire or watching this made me feel like I was disappearing, I was already sold. Then I watched it and I immediately sent it to a friend of mine with all caps, "You need to see this." Mirrored Mind was directed by Kagura Ishii, who's most well known for his early punk cinema works like Burst City or Crazy Thunder Road, which have a slightly different vibe to Mirrored Mind. Mirrored Mind is a story about an actress in the throes of burnout. She's in the middle of making a movie with her partner, a meta story about her current mental state, which is ringing on deaf ears. After confrontation with said partner, the director of the movie, things go from bad to worse, and she decides to take a trip to settle things right and maybe find her soul. Mirrored Mind is a gorgeous movie, and the visual storytelling of the first dialogue scene is something that will stay in my soul forever. I plan to make a video on it at some point, but I still have important pieces of Ishii's filmography to see before I can do that. That said, Mirrored Mind is a somber, almost ethereal story that's equal parts calming and heart-wrenching. Let's conclude with this perfect little moment from the halfway point of the movie.
幸せになるためでなく幸せになるために生まれてきたのだから今この時は最高に幸せなのだからこの状態になるために生まれてきたんだよねだからこのままでいいんだよね
Live Flash.
Even among Almodovar movies, I think this one is kinda hard to synopsize. Here we go. Our main character is a juvenile delinquent Victor who was born on a night bus in fascist Italy and was granted a free public transport ticket for a lifetime, which by the way is a detail that never comes up again. In his teens, he tries to hook up with Elena, the second main character of the story, but after things heat up and the police are called to the scene, he ends up shooting one of them and goes to jail. While in prison, David, the cop who was shot and our third main character, has turned into a famous wheelchair basketball player and started dating Elena. This is the first 15 minutes or so of the movie. Yeah. But this is exactly the strength of Almodovar's storytelling. The stories are winding and full of weird curiosities that don't really go anywhere, but they always have a sense of vision that cuts through the chaos. They don't feel like they're constrained to a 3-act structure, they work more on a jazz-like feel, always lurching forward but reintroducing the core theme with all the new ideas incorporated into it. The movie might start with a completely unrelated short story that continues with the birth of the main character, then move on to be a crime thriller for just a moment, before simmering down to a complicated love triangle that has a conclusion that hinges on an offhanded character establishing line in the beginning of the movie. You never really know where the story is going before it has arrived. Live Flesh also has some great disability representation. Despite being wheelchair bound for most of the movie, David, played by the ever fantastic Javier Bardem, remains the most powerful person on screen at any moment. Almodovar movies are a real trip, and I hope that the double inclusion in this list has caught your attention. His filmography is deep, and while uneven, always fascinating and challenging. Among the ones I've already mentioned, I would highly recommend Pain and Glory, Volver, Women on the Verge of Breakdown, and his newest outing, Parallel Mothers, which I already know will make its way to the best watches of 2023.
The Great Silence.
One of my New Year's resolutions is to watch more samurai movies and westerns. I watched some of the classics and the cult masterpieces from both, but I feel like I'm understudied on them. The Great Silence was something that was floating on my Twitter timeline for a long time, and as soon as it began snowing, it popped up again, and this year I made note to check it out. And it's just fantastic, right? On general terms, it's a pretty typical western. An outsider comes into a troubled community to set things right with righteous gun violence, but The Great Silence neatly complicates things by setting everyone from the good guy to the bad guy on the side of the law, and the outlaws are mostly a moral question hanging in the background of the movie. There's this one amazing scene where the main trio of men is traveling on a horse carriage, and the sheriff is finger-wagging Klaus Kinski's pitch-perfect, despicable villain over the way he's handling corpses, as if he's not talking to the most active serial killer in a 100-mile radius. I won't go further than that, but it's a classic for a reason, and if you don't watch it now, check it out the second you get even an inch of snow next fall. It's a perfect pairing.
Hard to Be a God.
And now we get to the final movie on this list. On December 29th, originally I was supposed to go see Avatar: The Way of Water with my partner and their family, but sadly, and gladly, there was a little mishap with my tickets. You see, I had these serial tickets. I had 3 left, and they were gonna expire on the next day. In my infinite naivete, I placed an order on the ticket, got the message back from them, checked that the time was correct, and forgot about it. On the day, we went there like 15 minutes beforehand. I walk up to the counter to trade my serial ticket for an actual ticket, and they say to me, "Please sir, would you look at your reservation? It says that you need to retrieve the ticket 1 day beforehand." And at that point, I knew I was going to see Hard to Be a God, only because it was also 3 hours long, and that's funny. Plus, it's really hard to imagine that I would have liked Avatar even a tenth as much as I liked Hard to Be a God. Hard to Be a God is so fucking good. It's ostensibly a sci-fi story about a bunch of scientists who have arrived on a planet which is basically similar to Earth, but living 800 years in the past. The society in Hard to Be a God is right on that cusp of Renaissance, but for complicated political reasons, they have begun persecuting and killing intellectuals. The main character, who takes on the name Don Rumata, then tries to save these intellectuals and push society forward. On multiple different levels, Hard to Be a God is hard to be a fun watching experience. It's 3 hours long, it's black and white, it's comprised of these long shots that go on forever and ever and ever. All of the people have these inane conversations that don't seem to connect in any sort of way, and that's all very much intentional. You see, the conclusion, which is mirrored in the name Hard to Be a God, is about the futility of trying to push social change by yourself, even if you have an advantage doing it. There's no system to change. The world in Hard to Be a God is in a state of complacent chaos. Do you ever get that temptation of laziness to put something in the general bin because the recycle bin doesn't have a bag or something? That's the society of Hard to Be a God, and it's reflected on the most important thing of the movie. You know, the piss, the shit, the bile, the snot, like every other fluid that can be extracted from the human body oozing from every square inch of the screen. But that's the stuff people have already noticed. But I want to go one step beyond, because there are so many interesting, weird, reoccurring motifs throughout the film. If you want to watch it and go to a hospital before it's over, I would highly suggest taking a shot every time there's like a nose twist or some sort of violence towards a nose. It's bizarrely the most common act of violence in Hard to Be a God. Also, Hard to Be a God is a found footage film, placing it somewhere in the top 3 found footage films of all time, maybe? And the little detail I love the most is that one of the most sci-fi elements of the movie are these 2 jazz solos the main character plays in the opening and ending of the movie. They're just so anachronistic and just very nice tunes. But yeah, Hard to Be a God. Hard to recommend, but also hard not to love. So 2022 was a bit of a tough year in many ways. I think my most lasting memory of this year, historically speaking at least, is dissociating at a protest the day Russia's invasion of Ukraine started. And this is not to say that the invasion is any worse than the myriad other wars and coups and horrible shit going on in the world, but as a person who's living in a country neighboring Russia, who's built his whole sense of security around the immovable truth that Russia will not attack us because it's just too stupid to do, this sort of a thing sort of makes you think things over. There's also the added frustration with other fellow leftists who hopped onto being pro-Putin or at least anti-Ukraine, and I don't know, it was sort of a miserable experience to see all of that. But at the same time, I will remember 2022 as the year I moved in with my partner, the year I first partook in a strike, and also of great movie watching experiences. The amount of times I've teared up or gotten the urge to rewatch something while editing this video is a testament to the sheer greatness of art in the midst of global turmoil. Another sign of the times is that there's a Finnish genre movie I'm excited to see for the first time since 2008? Damn. In the spirit of that optimism, I'm gonna do something I haven't done up to this point and ask for a bit of audience engagement. What were some of the movies you saw this year that got you going? Did you see anything new that got you hopeful for the future? Or generally, if you think there's a movie I would love based on the movies on this video, do share it in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, you can always get weirder.